There are all sorts of very fascinating dynamics that have emerged with the, I would say, close to unprecedented attempt to force Joe Biden, the current sitting elected president, out of an election that he obviously wants to run in, that he was named the Democratic nominee for, and one that he has no intention of leaving. And yet there is a concerted effort on the part of the media that had long protected Joe Biden, but that is so desperate to do anything to ensure Donald Trump doesn't win, but also the kind of 500 or 1,000 people that really run the Democratic Party, the very large funders, the oligarchs that fund the Democratic Party, and both of them are in a concerted effort to force Joe Biden out of a race that, whatever you think of Joe Biden, he is the president and wants to remain in. And that obviously raises all kinds of interesting questions about what type of democracy the United States is. We're constantly hearing from the Democratic Party that they and they alone can protect and preserve American democracy. And this raises a lot of questions. Now, one of the questions before we get to that is that we have long heard over the last several weeks from Biden defenders that the reason it's so inappropriate to force Joe Biden out of office is because the Democratic Party voters, their sacred voters who have the power in our system of government to make decisions, were given a wide choice, and they decided that they wanted Joe Biden to be their presidential nominee in 2024, and it's therefore inappropriate to try and deny them that wish. Now, the reality is that as the Democratic Party claims that it is the only believer in or protector of American democratic values, the Democratic Party for years now has been acting in an extremely repressive and anti-democratic way, especially when it comes to choosing who the nominee of the president for the presidency that party will have. That's been the case in 2016 and in 2020, but also in 2024. The idea that Democratic voters were given a free choice and decided that they were going to vote for Joe Biden as the nominee that they wanted is an absolute joke. The Democratic Party, more than a year ago, was clear and explicit that they were not going to allow any primary challenges to Joe Biden. That even if there were primary challengers, and there were, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson and others, they would not allow any debates. They would not give those candidates any chance to even get on ballots, and that they had declared before any vote was cast that no matter what, the presidential nominee of the Democratic Party would be Joe Biden. Now, that stands in stark contrast to what the Republican Party did. You'll probably recall that a lot of different well-known and established and popular and very well-funded politicians like current Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott and former Vice President Mike Pence ran for the Republican nomination. They were given the opportunity to appear on screen and in debates, and people voted for Donald Trump. He was the actual choice of the Republican Party to be the nominee. The Democratic Party did the opposite. They foreclosed any possibility of having a Democratic vote. Here was Simone Sanders, who worked both in the for the Biden White House and then also for Kamala Harris. And then, like so many of them, like Jen Psaki, she left to do the same thing at MSNBC. She's an official Democratic Party spokeswoman, but for MSNBC, she went on Morning Joe in May of 2023. And this is what she announced about the upcoming Democratic primary to determine who will be the nominee for 2024.
Bobby Kennedy Jr. doing well. He's at 19%. Hasn't really gotten that much out there. I mean, and I'm starting to hear more and more talk about him. Are we going to actually have a challenge here?
I'm trying not to laugh, Joe. There's not going to
Wait,
be.
can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
Do you know how many people said the same thing about Donald Trump in 2015
true.
on
Yes,
this show?
except
said
I will
the
note,
same exact thing.
Yes, because there was going to be a Republican primary. But I really think that the mealy-mouthed Democrats, as I like to call them, and some of my progressive friends.
Okay, so first of all, she's saying that Joe Scarborough tried to say you're laughing at the idea that anybody might be able to win over Joe Biden. And then Joe Scarborough said, well, people were saying the same thing in 2016 about Donald Trump. They were scoffing at the idea that he might win. And she said, yeah, but the difference is the Republican Party actually allowed a primary in 2016. So anybody might win, whoever the voters choose. In contrast, we're the Democratic Party, and we are not going to have a primary. We're not going to allow anyone to challenge Joe Biden. And that's why I'm saying I know for certain Biden will win, because there's not going to be any kind of free and fair election. There's not going to be an election at all. Listen to what she says.
Who would like to live in a fantasy land, they need to come back to reality. And the reality is this: the sitting president of the United States of America is a Democrat that would like to run for re-election, so much so that he has declared a re-election campaign. In that case, the Democratic National Committee will not facilitate a primary process. There will be no debate stage for Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson, or anyone else to stand
So we're going to
on.
have another Bobby Kennedy in an empty chair in the debate, right?
There will be no debate.
Yeah, no debate.
The Democratic National Committee administers the debates, and they're not going to set up a primary process for debates for someone to challenge the head of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I mean, one more. Do you hear what she said? She said the Democratic Party, the DNC, will not facilitate a primary election. There will be nobody permitted to challenge Joe Biden. We will not have any presidential debates. The Democratic Party won't allow them. And we are telling you right now, before a single vote is cast, that the nominee of our party will be Joe Biden. Not because I'm predicting that based on what the voters might do, but that we're not going to give the voters any opportunity to actually choose. There's no choice, she said. And that's exactly what the Democratic Party proceeded to do. In fact, there was, in some states, not even a Democratic Party ballot. So this idea that, it would be contrary to democracy to force Joe Biden out of the race because he was the nominee chosen by the base of the voters of the Democratic Party is a complete joke. I heard Jen Psaki saying that. I heard Joe Scarborough saying that. So many of them have said that. David Axelrod said it. It's the exact opposite of reality. Now, obviously, this is not the first time that the Democratic Party, the saviors of American democracy, have acted anti-democratically, as we know in 2016. The DNC cheated in every conceivable way possible to ensure that Bernie Sanders could not possibly win the nomination over Hillary Clinton, even if he got the most votes. And you don't need to listen to me to believe that happened. Here is a stalwart Democratic Party loyalist named Senator Elizabeth Warren, who went on PBS in November of 2017 and said this.
We're learning today that a new book that is coming out by Donna Brazile, the former acting chair of the Democratic National Committee, that the campaign of Secretary Hillary Clinton was far more influential at the Democratic Party, the Democratic National Committee, than we previously knew. Do you think, though, that what we're learning from Donna Brazile's book suggests that the campaign, that what the Democratic National Committee did, meant this election was rigged?
Yeah, I think it was.
It's a pretty powerful charge.
Well, what we have to focus on now as Democrats is we recognize the process was rigged, and now it is up to Democrats to build a new process, a process that really works and works for everyone. And
now, isn't it amazing, by the way, how if Republicans say that they think the 2020 election was rigged, that's considered almost illegal. It's called election denialism, whatever. But Elizabeth Warren came right out and said, and so did Donna Brazile, who ran Al Gore's campaign, was the chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, that the Democratic Party rigged the election in 2016 to ensure that Hillary Clinton won and that voters had no choice. Here is another thing the Democrats did. From Politico in October of 2016, Donna Brazile is under siege after giving Clinton debate questions. As you might know, Donna Brazile was a CNN commentator at the time. CNN was hosting a debate between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And she got exposed for having passed debate questions that CNN prepared and intended to ask only to Hillary Clinton, but not to Bernie Sanders. And here's how it got exposed. Quote, after hacked emails published Monday by WikiLeaks appeared to reveal that Donna Brazile, during her time as a CNN commentator, gave advance notice to Clinton's camp about a debate question. Brazile has lost a CNN contract, which had been suspended since Brazile took over the DNC in July, and found herself used as fodder for one of Donald Trump's favorite talking points, that in this, quote, rigged election, the DNC has been in the bag for Clinton since the beginning. Isn't it amazing? They're like, oh, this is a Donald Trump talking point when we just heard Elizabeth Warren say exactly the same thing. And by the way, is it any wonder why the Democrats wanted so badly Julian Assange to rot in prison, given how much corruption he exposed on the part of the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign, including what Donna Brazile did? And just to remind you, here from The Guardian in July of 2016, quote, Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign as DNC chair as email scandal rocks the Democrats. Quote, Schultz said she would step down after the convention. She has been forced to step aside after a leak of DNC emails showed officials actively favoring Hillary Clinton during the presidential primary and plotting against Clinton's rival, Bernie Sanders. They rigged the election in 2016. They cheated constantly. They denied voters the opportunity for a free and fair election, just like they did in 2024, as we just heard from Simone Sanders. And they would have gotten away with it. People would have suspected it, but couldn't prove it unless and until WikiLeaks published the truth about what the Democratic Party did in the emails that they published, which is, of course, why Democrats to this very day despise Julian Assange and want him in prison, not because they think he endangered national security, but because they think that he helped elect Donald Trump in 2016 by exposing true, authentic, and genuine corruption on the part of the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. This is the party constantly claiming they're the only ones who believe in the values of democracy. They cheated in 2016. Their top officials had to resign. They got caught passing questions of the Clinton campaign and rigging the entire thing. 2024, they just said, we're not having an election at all. And then in 2020, as you might remember, Bernie Sanders won the first three primaries, including in Nevada, where he had a gigantic victory. He looked well on the way to winning the nomination until Barack Obama intervened and basically made deals with and threatened and cajoled every candidate who might divide the vote with Joe Biden to drop out of the race. The only one they allowed to stay in was Elizabeth Warren, because they knew she would take votes away from Bernie Sanders, which would help Biden. And rather than a free or fair election, it was one that was completely shaped and controlled by the intervention in secret of Barack Obama. Here from the New York Times in April of 2020, quote, accelerate the endgame, Obama's role in wrapping up the primary. Quote, with calibrated stealth, Mr. Obama has been considerably more engaged in the campaign's denouement than has been previously revealed, even before he endorsed Mr. Biden on Tuesday. For months, Mr. Obama had kept in close contact with senior party officials in hopes of preventing a repeat of the protracted and nasty 2016 presidential race. Then in the weeks after it became clear that Mr. Biden was the party's near certain nominee, Mr. Obama, telling a friend he, quote, needed to accelerate the endgame, had at least 4 conversations, long conversations, with his former vice president's remaining rival, Senator Bernie Sanders. Mr. Obama's efforts to ease the senator out of the race played a significant role in Mr. Sanders' decision to end his bid and endorse Mr. Biden. According to people close to the Vermont Independent, Mr. Obama did not directly encourage Mr. Sanders' rivals to endorse Biden ahead of the decisive Super Tuesday primaries, but he did tell Pete Buttigieg, a moderate, that he would never have more leverage than on the day that he was quitting the race. And the former South Bend mayor soon joined the avalanche of former candidates backing Mr. Biden. Meaning, look, if you drop out now, Pete, and help Joe Biden, you have a lot of leverage right now. Biden got the nomination because Buttigieg dropped out at Obama's urging. The minute Biden wins, he names Pete Buttigieg, whose only experience was becoming mayor of South Bend, Indiana with 8,000 votes. He puts him in charge of the Department of Transportation, an area in which obviously Pete Buttigieg has no experience and was completely unqualified to run because of that quid pro quo. Here from Fox 35 in Orlando in March of this year, quote, why Florida Democrats will not even vote in the presidential preference primary. Quote, if you are registered with the Democratic Party, you will not receive a ballot in this PPP. Since the Florida Democratic Party nominated Joe Biden as their sole candidate, there is no ballot for registered voters registered with the Democratic Party. So there's your party that saves American democracy, that is safeguarding the values of democracy. It is the very opposite of what democracy is. And while I want to be the last person to ever defend Joe Biden in any way, I do think it's worth noting, just to close this up, that there is something a little bit odd from a perspective of what democracy is, that we have an elected president who, according to the Democratic Party, won the nomination. He is the Democratic Party nominee for president. And now, because a lot of people, very powerful and influential people, are frightened that Biden is going to lose to Donald Trump, they are now organizing in secret, using their power to force the elected president out of the White House and out of the race. Kind of smells like a little bit of a coup in some sense. And it doesn't matter what Democratic Party voters want in polls. It doesn't even really matter what the media is saying, because what they're saying is what they're told to say. The reality of American democracy is that there are about 500 to 1,000 people who actually control both parties. The billionaires and the mega donors who facilitate the campaign. And those are the people who are really making the decisions about who will be the nominee for president. Here's the New York Times on July 1st, quote, "The road to a crisis, how Democrats let Biden guide to renomination." Quote, "An 81-year-old candidate and no plan B." Quote, "How did we get here?" one leading Democrat asks. "The answer is complicated. Many party leaders, donors, activists, and ordinary voters, stunned by the president's faltering debate appearance, now fear he will lose to former President Trump and drag Democrats to devastating defeats in congressional and state elections. Mr. Biden is surrounded by a tight circle of longtime aides and family members who have encouraged his desire to seek a second term. At key moments, those who tried to sound the alarm about Mr. Biden's potential weaknesses, among them David Axelrod, Mr. Obama's chief strategist, and James Carville, who helped elect Bill Clinton in 1992, were slapped down by Democrats, often in the brutal discord of social media sites like X, and chastised by top Biden aides for being disloyal. Quote, I said then, privately and publicly, if Biden ran, he would be the nominee, Mr. Axelrod said. I felt a primary challenge would fail and only help Trump. I'm sure there were potential Democratic challengers who made the same calculation and didn't want to jeopardize their future by running and taking that risk. But now here's what's really going on from the New York Times 2 days later, July 3rd. Quote, big donors turn on Biden quietly. Some of the president's past supporters want a new candidate, but they are leery of going public. Quote, as of late Tuesday, the party's moneyed class was carefully monitoring post-debate poll results and the positioning of elected Democrats for signs that support for Mr. Biden was cracking. At a breakfast on Friday morning at the Hotel Jerome in Aspen, Colorado, where nearly 50 Democratic donors had gathered for a pre-planned meeting convened by the super PAC American Bridge, one person asked the crowd for a show of hands of how many thought Mr. Biden should step aside. Nearly everyone in the room raised their hands, according to 2 people present. On a private email list, including members of another liberal donor collective called Way to Win, participants expressed frustration with the Democratic Party's circling of the wagons around Mr. Biden and urged that Vice President Kamala Harris be considered for the top spot on the ticket. On Tuesday, both American Bridge and the Democratic Alliance hosted calls for donors anxious about the situation. Of the more than a dozen donors who spoke on the Bridge call, only one argued that the party should stick with Mr. Biden. Others expressed a desire to move on. The debate has particularly riven Democratic Party donor groups that are typically fairly harmonious. At Way to Win, a donor collaborative founded during the peak of Trump-era resistance, organization leaders have touted Ms. Harris as a potential replacement for Mr. Biden. Jen Fernandez-Ancona, a founder of the group, stressed Mrs. Harris's electoral viability to allies in an internal email chain reviewed by the Times. Quote, I absolutely believe we can do it with Harris at the top of a ticket and a good VP choice. Here's Ari Emanuel, the extremely wealthy Hollywood agent and brother of former Chicago mayor and Obama chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, who is opining here at the Aspen Ideas Festival. These are where these people congregate. These are the people who actually make the decisions. Well, we call what we have a democracy. Listen to what Ari Emanuel said.
All right, Democrats are jumping out of the window. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm pissed off at the Founding Fathers. They had the start date of 35. They just didn't give us the end date. Well, everybody died, so they didn't have to give the end date. I don't want to deal with Donald Trump and what he said was true. It's a given, certain things. I'm not going to talk about CNN. Here's what Biden did. He said he was going to run for one term, and he's doing it to restore democracy. He now runs for a second term. First bit of malarkey, as he would say. Then he says that this is for it's a quintessential thought about saving democracy, and it's so important, etc. His cohorts have told us that he's healthy for over a year. And I think it was 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. And I had a father who died at 92, but at 81, I took away his car. And it's a very simple test for me. If you were driving from downtown Beverly Hills to Malibu, would you want Biden to do it at night? Would you want Trump to do it at night? Or want neither? If the answer...
Okay, so you just see his frame of reference there. If you're driving from Beverly Hills to Malibu, he's at the Aspen Ideas Festival. These are where decisions actually get made about American democracy. Just to underscore the point as the final article here from the New York Times, this was June 29th, that really kicked off the entire cycle of people like Ari Emanuel, very powerful, very rich, big donors to the Democratic Party, who, for the first time, decided that they were going to criticize Joe Biden. They need to throw him out because they're worried he will lose to Trump. They don't care what the primary process resulted in. They don't care what Democratic Party registered voters decided, whether they wanted Biden or... They don't care about any of that. These are the people who run the party. These are the people who fund the party. And therefore, it's like 500 of them run both parties. And the New York Times here tells the story, quote, major Democratic donors asked themselves what to do about Biden. Quote, some floated interventions and wondered about how to reach Jill Biden. Others hoped the president would bow out of the race on his own. Many came to terms with the low chances that he will do so. The Democratic Party's perennially nervous donor class descended into deep unease on Friday as some of the wealthiest people in America commiserated over President Biden's weak debate performance and puzzled over what, if anything, they could do to change the course of the race. There were discussions with political advisors about arcane rules under which Mr. Biden might be removed from the ticket against his will and replaced at or before the Democratic National Convention, according to a person familiar with the effort. In Silicon Valley, a group of mega donors, including Ron Conway and Laurene Powell Jobs, were calling, texting, and emailing one another about a situation they described as a possible catastrophe. Now, Ron Conway is one of those billionaire hedge fund managers. Laurene Powell Jobs is not only the widow of Steve Jobs, which is where she got all of her billions of dollars from that she uses to fund the Democratic Party, but she's also the owner of The Atlantic, a magazine monomaniacally devoted to stopping Donald Trump. These are the people who, for all we want to call our society a democracy and our voting political system a democracy, are the ones who actually run things. And you see them all like rats, like in secret, plotting about what they're going to do. Are they going to remove Joe Biden against his will? Are they going to try and get to Jill Biden and persuade her? Are they going to try and prop up Biden. Quote, the donors wondered about whom they could in the Biden fold. They could contact to reach Jill Biden, the first lady, who in turn could persuade her husband not to run. A Silicon Valley donor who had planned to host an intimate fundraiser featuring Mr. Biden this summer decided not to go through with the gathering because of the debate, according to a person told directly by the prospective host. Another major California donor left a debate watch party early and emailed a friend with the subject line, quote, utter disaster. In group chats and hushed discussions, some wealthy Democrats floated interventions, and others hoped Mr. Biden would have an epiphany and decide to exit on his own, and still more strategized about steering dollars to down-ballot candidates. The most optimistic donors wanted to wait for the polling to see the scope of the fallout. The crisis in the donor class, outlined in interviews with almost 24 donors and fundraisers, many of whom insisted on anonymity to discuss their private conversations, could not come at a worse moment for Mr. Biden. Former President Donald J. Trump has outraised him in each of the last 2 months, erasing the president's once gaping financial advantage and opening one of his own. So on both sides, you see the total fraud of this democracy narrative. You see the Democratic Party running their party with nothing resembling a democracy, where voters have almost no say on purpose in the outcome of the election or who their nominee will be. And then on the other side, you see who actually runs the party. People like Steve Jobs' widow and hedge fund managers who fund the Democratic Party with hundreds of millions of dollars. Which is why it was such a joke to hear in 2016 about how a few Facebook fake pages from Russia and a few Twitter bots somehow shifted the election, when these elections are flooded with billions of dollars from the richest people in the United States who have immense power over each of the political parties and their agendas. And the idea that Democrats really do believe, or that the media allies really do believe, that somehow the Democratic Party is the sole guardian of, protector of, and believer in democratic values, when the party is essentially the living, breathing antithesis of what democracy is supposed to be about, is exactly the opposite of reality, just as the narrative about what the Supreme Court ruling did and what its actual context is in history was all about.